Good evening, Nihar Vishwas sir. Good evening, Tripathi sir. Hello. Good evening, Tripathi sir. Can you hear us, sir? Sir, you have to unmute yourself. Tripathi sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. Good evening, Nihar Vishwas sir. Nihar Vishwas sir also had joined.
Dr. Vishwas, you have to unmute. So Nihar Vishwas, you have to unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself.
Is it okay?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Yes. Okay, I am listening. Start the proceeding and the lecture.
So,
Dr. Shambhu, you can start proceed.
Okay, sir. So I am waiting for Rohan actually. Okay, sir. We should start now, sir.
So Dr. Hazra.
Yeah. So
good evening, Dr. Hazra.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
okay. So good evening, respected delegates. So we are really fortunate to have today the day 2 of Pharmacovigilance Week, Professor Dr. Abhijit Hajra sir. So first of all, may I request Professor Shantanu Kumar Tripathi sir to say something on today's topic, that is signal management and disproportionality statistics in pharmacovigilance, and then we can start today's lecture. Over to you, Tripathi sir.
So good evening, everybody, and I have the privilege to welcome Professor Vishwas, Nihar Ranjan Vishwas, who is the Director of Indira Gandhi Institute of Medical Sciences at Patna, and we are privileged to have Professor Abhijit Hajra of IPGMER Kolkata. who is also the learned speaker in today's session. We all know we are observing and celebrating the National Pharmacovigilance Week, and today is the second day. Yesterday we have started. There will be on each of these days in the evening, it is actually 8:30, we'll have this program, 1 hour program as scheduled. And today is the second day. And we are really privileged to have Professor Hajra, who will be speaking on signal management and disproportionality statistics in pharmacovigilance. It's a very important area we all appreciate, and particularly it will be very useful for all the people who have joined today, including the residents in pharmacology and also the different pharmacovigilance associates in different adverse drug reaction monitoring centers of PPI. This is going to be very useful for all of us. It's an area which is relatively less traveled, less discussed. We have the opportunity to listen to Professor Hajra, who is, we can't have a better person than him to actually dwell on this area. So without standing between the audience and our learned speaker, I would request Professor Hajra to please proceed with the lecture. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tripathi, for the introduction. So it's a privilege for me to be here this evening and discuss with you on this topic, signal processing and management in pharmacovigilance. So it's nice that nationwide we are observing Patient Safety Day, and which was on 17th September. And in the same sequence, the National Pharmacovigilance Week. Lots of different programs are going on in our own institute, IPJML Kolkata. We have planned a fun event in the form of a pharmacovigilance quiz for our postgraduates on 21st. Now, it's really nice that this week-long discussions are being held on topics which would be of immediate relevance and importance to our residents in pharmacology and anyone else with a keen interest in pharmacovigilance. I can see delegates from across the country in this meeting. So if you are very new to this field of signal detection and pharmacovigilance, you might find the topic a little bit technical. But in order to stick to the time, I'll be going a little bit fast, and maybe we can spare some time for discussion at the end. So let us go into the topic proper. I'll share my slides and I'll request Dr. Shambho, who is anchoring today's program, to let me know whether the slides can be seen.
Yes, sir. We can see
Okay.
your
Are
slides.
they moving as well?
Sir,
Okay.
you have to make it full screen, sir.
Yes, I have made it full screen. Now are they moving?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Perfectly.
Good. So I have digressed a little bit from the topic which you have put on your flyer. So for simplicity's sake, I'm calling this presentation as Signals in Pharmacovigilance. And disproportionality statistics is part of this. So signals in pharmacovigilance, generation and processing. Our agenda for today, learning agenda, would be, we'll familiarize ourselves with the meaning of this term signal, activities surrounding signals in the form of signal detection. So we'll be looking at what is meant by this thing as signal detection. Now there are two major modes of signal detection. One is qualitative, the other is quantitative. And this quantitative signal detection incorporates some statistical exercises, things like the reporting odds ratio or ROR, the proportional reporting ratios, the PRR, the information component, IC, the omega, etc. We'll take a closer look at these disproportionality statistics. Now, globally, you must be knowing that the Uppsala Monitoring Center at Uppsala in Sweden is the WHO Coordinating Center for Global Spontaneously Reported Adverse Drug Reactions. So we'll speak about how signal detection is done at the UMC. Signal detection is also done in a few countries around the world, but the global efforts, you really need to work on large amounts of data, which is available in this global database. Then we'll take a very brief look at commercial data mining software, and then we'll discuss about signal evaluation. And finally, what is the outcome of the whole process? What is done with signals that are detected, and we'll conclude thereafter. So this is our roadmap for today's discussion, and we begin with the first point. What is a signal? Now, I'm sure that most of our postgraduates are aware of this definition. So the classic definition given by the World Health Organization says that a signal is reported information on a possible causal relationship between an adverse event and a drug. This relationship being largely unknown previously, or even if known, it is incompletely documented. Okay. So you have got reports of an adverse event, and you have got reports of a drug which could be linked to that event. And if a causal relationship can be inferred, then you are generating a signal. But that signal has to be processed before you are reasonably certain that this is a causal link, and therefore it should be coming into the literature and all these things. Usually, more than a single report is required to generate a signal, depending on the seriousness of the event and the quality of the information. Now, the advantage of working with large databases is that you have the power of numbers, and therefore signals which come in from different locations, signals which come in from different parts of the world, strengthen the whole process. There are other definitions of signals where different adjectives have been used. Things like verified relationship, sufficient, likelihood, etc. So another way of looking at this term signal, it's a hypothesis of risk. The risk of a particular event from a particular medicine, which is supported by data and arguments. Now, this hypothesis is not confirmed to begin with and may change with time. So it's an idea, it's an hypothesis which needs to be tested and confirmed before we can really say, yes, this is an adverse event associated with this particular drug, and therefore community at large must know about it. It must be reflected in the drug literature, prescribing information, and so on. So I'm sure that this bit is not difficult to understand. Now, what do we do with signals? So basically, three things are to be done with signal. First is detect the signal in the first place. Second, a very important activity is to prioritize signals. If we harness the power of information technology, then literally hundreds and thousands of signals can be generated in a short span of time, but only a small fraction of them are actually clinically meaningful or clinically significant. And therefore, we need to prioritize the signals which need a closer look, which actually need confirmation. And so this process of taking a closer look and confirming the signal is what we say is signal evaluation. So detection, followed by prioritization, followed by evaluation. These are the three spheres of activity in relation to signals. Now, coming to signal detection. Okay. So signal, as we learned, is a reported association between an event, an adverse event, and a medicine. Now, the signal does not always have to indicate absolutely new associations. If it's a known association, but there seems to be an increase in the frequency of the association, or there seems to be an increase in the severity of the event, or even some sort of qualitative change in the nature of the association. This also might lead to generation of safety signals. And signal detection is defined as a process of actively searching for and identifying safety signals by utilizing a variety of data sources. Now, what are these data sources? If you look at the WHO program, the most common source of signals comes from spontaneous reporting systems maintained by national or regional bodies. On the one hand, so we are having the pharmacovigilance program in India. So this pharmacovigilance program is linked to the global database, and this is a spontaneous reporting program. Side by side, our regulatory authority, the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, has a mechanism by which marketing authorization holders, that means the companies, they're supposed to submit what is called PSURs, periodic safety update reports, at a predefined frequency to the regulator. And what are these updates about? These updates are about possible adverse events related to the products which the company is marketing. There is a predefined schedule, and PSURs have to be mandatorily submitted for 4 years after market launch of the medicine. Though I must say that this mechanism is operating in India for quite some time, although it is not so strong as in the Western countries like the United States or some of the Western European nations. The Yellow Card program in UK. Yellow Card program in UK is another example of one of the oldest and most successful spontaneous area reporting systems in the world. And all medical practitioners, including dental practitioners and nurse practitioners in the UK, they are empowered and they are well aware to utilize the yellow cards, which are provided free to them to report signals. Of course, much of this reporting activity nowadays has shifted to online platforms. Now, where do these reports accumulate? The reports have to accumulate in reporting databases. And 3 examples of such databases is the VigiBase, which is maintained by the WHO Uppsala Monitoring Centre, the EUDRA Vigilance Database of the European Medicines Agency, and the Adverse Event Reporting System database of the United States Food and Drug Administration. So these are examples of databases which capture ICSRs, individual case safety reports. So each individual report spontaneously reported by a prescriber or a consumer of a medicine or by a pharmaceutical company becomes an ICSR. And these databases basically record the ICSRs which keep coming in over a period of time. So you have a large databases of ICSRs which can then be searched or mined, electronically mined for signals. So this is what we mean by signal detection activity. Now look, it is not possible for a single person or a group of persons or even a single institution to do this signal detection activity by itself if you are dealing with a large database, because there are hundreds and thousands of events which must be looked into, which must be shifted. So once a drug is in the market, it can quickly amass a large number of individual case safety reports. So this is too large to reasonably review at the level of a single individual or single association. Therefore, institution. Therefore, what is needed that we need to prioritize these signals. Prioritize in terms of which signals need further evaluation and which signals are not so strong and therefore they can be discarded for the moment. So in order to prioritize, we need appropriate prioritization thresholds, which must be put into place to focus attention on signals which should be of greater concern amidst a vast array of signals. So this prioritization business can be done qualitatively, but increasingly we are having to rely upon quantitative methods, statistical methodology to prioritize the signals for further evaluation. Okay. Now, worldwide, regulatory agencies and organizations which are engaged in signal detection and monitoring, they have tried to define events, medical events, which can be used as search terms to filter results that need further medical review. And the technical jargon for these terms is important medical events. So among hundreds of signals, you first try to identify important medical events. And sometimes regulatory agencies have also mapped what is called designated medical events. So if you get a report of an event which matches your list of designated medical events, so these events are always to be prioritized, irrespective of what the statistical analysis puts through or not. For instance, if you get reports of anaphylaxis, whether or not it is identified as having a prioritization threshold by your statistical methodology, it should always be looked into and processed further. So DMEs, designated medical events, are often rare but serious events, and therefore this DME list serves as a safety net to ensure that signals are not missed. So in this part, we have learned that we need to methodology to prioritize signals in order not to be overwhelmed by the large number of individual case safety reports which rapidly accumulate in pharmacovigilance databases. Prioritization can be done qualitatively or quantitatively, and you can have preset lists which may be called important medical events, which can be used to filter, be used as filters to search through your databases of events. And some rare but serious events may be labeled as designated medical events, which come high in the priority list, and they're always to be looked into irrespective of what their prioritization threshold calculations are. And here you can see a short segment of the DME list currently used by the European Medicines Agency. And you can see things like pulmonary arterial hypertension, pulmonary fibrosis, then sudden cardiac death, sudden visual loss, Torsades, toxic epidermal necrolysis, ventricular fibrillation. So it's common sense that all these events are serious medical events. They can be life-threatening, and even if not life-threatening, they can seriously jeopardize the quality of life. So if there are reports using these terms, then these individual case safety reports must always be reviewed or scrutinized, irrespective of what statistical results say. So this is an example of a DME list, and the list is not very long. It's within 100 events or 100 terms in this list currently being used by the EMA. So how do you do qualitative signal detection? How do you filter out your ICSR database? There are two broad modes. One is the qualitative or the traditional mode, and then there is the quantitative modes, which relies on formal statistical methodology. So here you need individuals who would scan through these databases in order to identify striking ICSRs. They can also look at literature being published throughout the world to review case series with calculation of incidence rates. Now, most countries require pharmaceutical companies to submit periodic safety update reports for new drugs and new products, and most of them provide summaries in forms of aggregate tables, saying which event has been encountered most frequently, then those encountered less frequently, like that. And a quick review of this aggregate tables can also be appointed to possible signals. So specific sections in periodic safety update reports for new drug, such as overall safety evaluation, can provide the clinical context around certain events and become an important data source for signal detection. So these reports, in contrast to just mere listing in databases, can provide a clinical narrative, the circumstances, the clinical circumstances in which that particular event was encountered, and therefore it is likely to be a more meaningful way of looking at the events in order to see whether they are possible pointers or possible signals. Okay. Now we come to quantitative signal detection. For simple reason that as time goes on and the databases become larger and bulkier, we need to resort to quantitative methods, statistical methods, in order to identify signals from individual case safety reports. And this statistical methodology has traditionally been called as disproportionality statistics. So disproportionality is calculated as ratio of the proportion of spontaneous individuals' case safety reports of a specific drug event pair to the proportion that would be expected if the association was simply due to chance. So why disproportionality? Because if events happen merely by chance, then you should expect that they should be reported in a certain proportion. But events are not due to chance. They are actually causal events being caused by the drug. Then you expect them to be reported in greater proportion than background rates due to chance alone. Therefore, this is called disproportionality statistics. And two of the popular methods, traditional statistical methods of looking at disproportionality, is something called the ROR and something called the PRR. So let us try to remember that ROR stands for reporting odds ratio. Reporting odds ratio. Whereas PRR stands for proportional reporting ratio. We'll shortly understand these two terms, but please try to remember the expanded form of the abbreviations. ROR is reporting odds ratio and PRR is proportional reporting ratios. Now, ROR and PRR are calculated through traditional statistical methods or what is known as frequentist methods. But there are more advanced statistical methods, Bayesian methods, in order to calculate disproportionality. And two of this Bayesian statistics is what is known as IC, or the information component, and the EBGM ratio, EBGM, quite a mouthful, empirical bias geometric mean ratio. So the informational component and the empirical bias geometric mean ratio. Okay, so these are based on Bayesian statistical methods. And to tell you the truth, that I can't say that I have mastered this Bayesian statistical methods. I'm still quite uncomfortable around them. But reporting odds ratio and proportional reporting ratio are not difficult to understand. And this is something that we should be able to understand by the end of this deliberations. So any value of disproportionality greater than 1 indicates that the drug event combination is being reported more than that expected by chance. This we all know. When we calculate odds ratio or when we calculate relative risk, if the value is over 1, this means that there is a positive association between whatever event and whatever exposure we are interested in. Now, as with other fields, we do not stop at calculating just the ratios, but we also calculate the 95% confidence interval. And we look at the lower bound very carefully to see whether it is really a meaningful or a significant association. So first, let us try to understand the reporting odds ratio. So I'm sure that all of you have heard of the term odds ratio, and many of you are familiar with what the odds ratio means. So odds ratio is the ratio of two odds. So odds of an event occurring in the exposed group over odds of the same event occurring in the non-exposed group. That is what we know as the odds ratio. So in order to calculate the reporting odds ratio, we arrange the data in our familiar ABCD pattern in a 2x2 contingency table. And we know that mathematically calculating the odds ratio is simple. It is the cross product ratio AD by BC. So when we are trying to calculate the reporting odds ratio, we can arrange the data in ABCD fashion. But what does this A, B, C, and D stand for? So here, A stands for the number of reports you have, which mention both a particular drug X and a particular event Y. In contrast, D is the number of reports which mention neither event Y nor drug X. So A mentions both and B mentions neither. What is B? So the number of safety reports which mention the drug X but not the event Y. And C is the opposite of B, the number of safety reports that mention the event Y but not the drug X. So these are our A, B, C, D, and of course this is not rocket science. It is easy to understand. So you can identify A, B, C, D, whether you are looking at 200 events, 200 reports, I should say, whether you're looking at 200 reports or 2 million reports. If you have a computerized database, it would not be very difficult to identify A, B, C, D. And once you have your A, B, C, D, you can calculate your reporting odds ratio, AD by BC. But we should not stop at that. We should also calculate the 95% confidence interval surrounding the reporting odds ratio. And we should actually look at the lower bound and upper bound of the 95% confidence interval to interpret the results of the odds ratio. Okay. So here is an example. Say, in a COVID-19 pharmacovigilance database, there are 4 reports of Stevens-Johnson syndrome attributed to remdesivir. I shouldn't say attributed, suspected to be due to remdesivir. So this is our A. So there are reports which mentioning both SJS and remdesivir. These are 4. Okay. And there are 1,000 reports overall in this database. There are 50 cases of other adverse events reported for remdesivir, but not SJS. And there are 100 cases of SJS reported for various drugs, but not remdesivir. So we have got our A, B, C, and D. And from that, we can calculate our reporting odds ratio, which comes to 0.8. So in any way, this is not over 1. And if we look at the lower bound of the 95% confidence interval, this is 0.28. So it seems to be that the use of remdesivir is associated with a lower risk of SJS. But look at the upper bound, it says 2.26. So at the upper bound suggests that the use of remdesivir is associated with the risk of SJS. Since the two boundaries, since this 95% confidence interval is spanning the value 1, we know that this is not a statistically significant association, that possibly, so these are chance events and not actually attributable to remdesivir. So this is how our reporting odds ratios are calculated and interpreted. Now we come to the proportional reporting ratio. So this proportional reporting ratio is a ratio between the frequency with which a specific adverse event is reported for the drug of interest relative to all adverse events for the drug. So how many adverse events are reported for the drug, of which how many are the event of interest? And the frequency with which the same adverse event is being reported for all the drugs in the comparison group. Okay, Let us look at the example. This will make it clear. Suppose drowsiness has been reported 83 times for a drug X out of total 1356 adverse events reported for the drug. Okay. So what is the proportion of drowsiness reports? So proportion of drowsiness reports is 83 over 1356. Now drowsiness as an adverse event has been reported 1489 times out of 53789 total adverse events reported for a class of comparator drugs. Okay, so drowsiness was reported. So we have 53,789 total adverse reports for a group of similar drugs, of which drowsiness has been reported 1489 times. Now we'll put that in our numerator and denominator. The numerator would be our drug of interest, and the denominator would encompass other drugs of a similar class with the potential to cause drowsiness. And here we are getting a proportional reporting ratio of 2.21. So if you look at it, this suggests that drowsiness was reported more than twice as frequently among all adverse event reports for the drug of interest compared to the drugs in the comparison group. Of course, here also we should calculate our 95% confidence interval and look at the lower bound. So if the lower bound is also above 1, we can say, yes, this is a significant association between the event that we are interested in and between the drug that we are interested in. So proportional reporting ratio. So I'm sure that all of you have got the idea of what ROR and PRR means, and these values should preferably be expressed with the 95% confidence intervals, and they follow from the traditional statistical methods. Now, this particular statistics, the information component, is becoming increasingly popular and widely used in recent times. So we should try to understand what this IC means. So IC, originally introduced through Bayesian confidence propagation neural network. So it's a particular protocol or methodology of Bayesian statistics used for mining these drug safety database. So IC is a Bayesian measure of disproportionality between the observed and expected reporting of a drug adverse event pair. So positive IC value indicates that a particular drug ADR pair is reported more often than expected based upon all the reports in the database. On the other hand, if the IC value is negative, this implies that the drug ADR pair or the drug ADR combination is being reported less frequently than what is expected. Therefore, there is no relation between the drug and the ADR. The higher the value of the IC, the more the combination stands out from the background. And this IC is calculated from 4 components, A, B, C, D, where A, the interpretation is somewhat different. A stands for the total number of reports in the database. B stands for the total number of reports which include the event of interest. C stands for the total number of reports which have the drug of interest. And D stands for the total number of reports which have both the drug and the ADR mentioned. But it is not calculated as simply as our cross-product ratio. Mathematically, it is tweaked a little bit to be calculated as a Bayesian statistic on indicating a possible causal association between a drug and an event, and therefore generating a positive signal. New reports may cause the information component to either increase or decrease. When the information component is calculated from large numbers of reports, a new report is less likely to cause major fluctuation in the IC value. This is obvious. If the denominator is large, small changes in the numerator will not affect the IC values so much. But when a drug is relatively new, so there are relatively small number of reports on this drug, and here even a few new reports would tend to change the IC value to a greater extent. Okay. Now, people have calculated what is called the IC 0 to 5 value, which is the lower limit of a 95% confidence interval called the credibility interval for the IC. So since it is not calculated in the traditional way, it is not called the confidence interval in Bayesian statistics, but rather has been called the credibility interval, and the IC 0 to 5 value is the lower bound of this credibility interval. And this provides information about the stability of a particular IC value. The narrower the interval, the higher the stability. So this we know from our conventional idea about the 95% confidence interval. The smaller or the narrower the interval, the more reliable is the value itself. And the larger the interval, the less reliable is the value of the odds ratio or reporting ratio. If the IC value increases over time and the IC 0 to 5 value stays positive, this implies a connection between the drug and the adverse reaction. So it's no longer a chance association. The IC value is not only remaining positive, but it also increasing over time. Therefore, this suggests that there is a genuine association between the drug and the adverse reaction. However, since alternative explanation for the positive IC value is possible, clinical judgment remains essential in the identification of a signal. For instance, for some reason, if the media focuses on a particular drug event pair without people really knowing whether it's a causal association, then it can attract a larger number of reports on the drug event pair, and the IC value will tend to increase. Therefore, it is not solely a statistical exercise. The clinical interpretation also requires clinical awareness and clinical judgment of clinical experience of the drug actually causing that event. So IC value does not imply causality of a potential ADR by a drug. It only indicates the quantitative dependency between the ADR and the drug based on reporting to VG-base, because this concept of IC and omega have evolved through studies on the VG-base database maintained by the WHO Uppsala Monitoring Center. So what does this center do? Signal detection at QMC, it occurs through certain steps. So step one is what they call the first pass statistical screening. So at set intervals, the VG-base is periodically screened using VG-rank, an automated statistical signal detection method that prioritizes drug-ADR combination for further manual assessment. So VG-rank is the program which periodically mines the VG-base at set intervals, which can be programmed in order to prioritize individual case safety reports for further manual assessment. VG-rank incorporates disproportionality reporting together with aspects related to the quality and content of individual reports. So it is not solely a statistical ranking, it also gives weightage to the quality of the reports with the purpose to prioritize medicine adverse effect combinations by the strength of the evidence. In addition, the algorithm uses certain selection criteria in order to further prioritize the data and to focus on particular areas of interest, such as serious adverse drug reactions, newly marketed drug, specific drug groups such as cytotoxic or immunosuppressants, or specific patient population such as pediatrics or geriatrics, in order to do its signal prioritization. So for signal processing, the step one is the first pass statistical screening. Step two is a manual review. Obviously, this is labor intensive. So the prioritized medicine adverse event combinations are individually assessed by members of a multidisciplinary team comprising doctors, pharmacists, nurses, statisticians, and data scientists. So they have to sit periodically and discuss among themselves the prioritized medicine adverse effect combinations. And they identify whether the associations are likely to be real associations with carrying clinical significance or just chance association, which does not make clinical sense and therefore need not be looked at further. So the assessment consists of checking whether the adverse effect is already adequately covered in the product information, briefly reviewing the case series to exclude other more likely causes, and deciding whether or not the combination should be further assessed. So initial screening based upon automated signal processing, based upon automated data processing, is followed by a manual review. Then we come to the third step, which is a more in-depth manual review. Combination needing in-depth assessments are reviewed either by pharmacovigilance experts at EMC or by clinical experts in the EMC signal review panel. VG-based case reports are individually assessed and summarized, and the scientific literature is reviewed for additional evidence. So if you really have an important clinical event, suspected important event at hand, this in-depth manual assessment is going to be labor intensive, resource intensive, and also require time. So finally, it is the human expert committee which takes a final go or no-go decision whether or not the strength of the case indicates that a signal should be formulated and communicated. So step one, automated signal, automated report, you can say querying. Step two, an initial manual review. And step three, an in-depth manual assessment, at the end of which we have a go, no-go signal. That means either go along and report it as a signal, or don't go along and consider it as a false alarm. Now, what do we do once we have identified signals? There is no point in keeping it only in our files. We have to communicate it. So the next step, and the very vital step, is signal communication. So signals are communicated by another platform, which is called the Vigilize. And this is available to national pharmacovigilance centers participating in the WHO program for international drug monitoring. So the primary communication is through Vigilize, and since 2012, EMC signals are also getting published in the WHO Pharmaceuticals newsletter. So this is a periodic publication from WHO, and it is incorporating signals, but with the caveat that signals are still not confirmed adverse events. They are signals. So they are to be monitored more carefully. They have to be looked at in depth. And finally, the data would be tallied across the globe to decide whether it's a signal which can be discarded, or whether we can convert this officially signal to an adverse event linked to the particular drug. Now, I'm mentioning omega here because omega is a measure of disproportionality which helps in identifying drug-drug interactions. So omega is a measure of disproportionality reporting, not for an individual drug ADR pair, but for a drug-drug ADR triad. So at least two drugs used in combination and an event suspected to be linked to it. So omega is trying to generate signals of drug-drug interactions. For omega, the expected reporting on a drug-drug ADR triplet is based on a model where both drugs add to the baseline risk of the ADR independently of each other. A positive omega indicates that the two drugs, when taken together, increase the risk of ADR more than the sum of the risk attributable to each drug in itself. So we'll only call it an interaction only if it is, the overall likelihood is more than A plus B. So omega actually indicates that the two drugs taken concomitantly increase the ADR more than what we can simply say that since you are taking drug A and drug B, you are likely to experience adverse effects which would be come under the sum total of those possible from A and those possible from B. No, we can only call it an interaction when we are having something beyond simple addition. So in order to calculate omega, we require the following quantities, and omega is again reported with 95% CI. So what are these quantities? The relative reporting rate of the ADR for reports listing neither of the drug, the relative reporting rate of the ADR for reports listing drug 1 but not drug 2, relative reporting of the ADR for reports listing drug 2 but not drug 1, and the relative reporting rate of the ADR for reports listing both drugs. Only if the relative reporting rate of the ADR for reports listing both drugs is more than the other indices, then we can be reasonably confident. Yes, this combination of drugs is actually leading to this particular adverse event. So we are living in the IT era, in fact, IT revolution, and the artificial intelligence and the data informatics communities are at work. And in fact, you now have quite a few commercial software available for data mining in pharmacovigilance. So these are examples: QSAN by DrugLogic, which is the name of a company; Empirica Signal by Oracle. Oracle is a company which provides the Oracle platform for drug clinical trial database, which is regarded as the industry standard platform. AG Signals by Aris Global, DS Explorer by Cerner. There may be more, but these are the ones that seem to be used more often. They are, of course, tremendously expensive software, and they can be used by large centers for mining their own databases for safety signals. So why manual evaluation of signals is necessary if you have such powerful data mining software? And nowadays you are trying to merge artificial intelligence technology with this data mining software. The reason is very simple, that if you have artificial intelligence, you are also likely to have artificial stupidity. And you cannot afford to let artificial stupidity get in the way of things. So you still need the human brain, however stupid it might be, in order to review the signals. It is something like your reports from clinical laboratories, which keep a line at the bottom to be clinically correlated. So rare events will not show up in statistical screens, and you really need an astute mind to pick up rare but possible serious events and attribute to a particular drug or a combination of drugs. Background event rates will confound strength of association. And here this table is trying to show with some examples of how background incidence of events can modify the strategy for signal detection and signal processing. Okay. So if background event rate is common and the reported event rate is also common, for instance, cough and AC inhibitors. Cough is a common problem, and cough is a common adverse drug reaction, adverse event attributable to the use of AC inhibitors. So difficult, large observational trials or data is required to establish this in terms of traditional epidemiology. But here you need the tools of data mining. Okay. But if both are rare or uncommon, okay, that the event rate is uncommon, whereas the background rate is very common, then you have a very difficult task at hand. In the face of common events, whether you can really attribute that to a particular drug, it becomes virtually impossible. Okay. However, if the event is common, whereas the background rate is uncommon or rare, the first row, then it becomes relatively easy, even by manual screening of individual case safety reports or periodic automated review if the event is common and the background rate is rare. And of course, these events are also likely to be picked up in the development phase of the drug during your phase 2 or phase 3 clinical studies, and they're also likely to be picked up through phase 4 post-marketing surveillance. Right. So you still require clinical interpretation. So why manual evaluation of signals is necessary? Statistical methods assume that drugs in the market are used by a representative sample of the general population. Is not so. It can be used in all manner of the population in all manner of desirable and undesirable ways. Quality of data may vary from one database to another. Data contributed by HCPs, that is healthcare providers, are likely to be more complete and of higher quality than that by consumers or lay people. And there is something called the Weber effect. The peak reporting of adverse events for a drug in the marketplace occurs within the first 2 years of approval during the initial 5-year marketing period. Of course, there is a lot of interest with new drugs. The companies also focus on the new products. The prescribers also prescribe, but keeping an eye open for possible adverse events. This is called the Weber effect. So the peak reporting of adverse events occurs in the initial parts of the marketing. There may be over-reporting of trivial events, a reporting of spurious events because of media attention and political obligation. So we had a recent this thing that a lot of hue and cry was raised over the possible association between QT interval prolongation and hydroxychloroquine, because hydroxychloroquine was being repurposed as an anti-COVID drug. But if you look at the literature and the subsequent studies which have been done, there is actually no meaningful association that hydroxychloroquine is a dangerous drug which can tremendously prolong the QT interval and lead to arrhythmias and cardiac deaths and so on. There may be underreporting of serious events. And finally, clinical judgment is essential to understand the clinical context in which it is occurring, because ultimately this context is what is important and what prescribers would need to know and would be interested in. So causality evaluation is done for really strong signals, and that evaluation again is not always a straightforward business. We need to look at many things. If you remember the original Dawes and Hills criteria, so this list includes many of these criteria. You have to look at biological plausibility and even be plausibly explained by the drug. And the event biology can possibly explained by the changes brought about by the drug. Whether there has been positive re-challenge, evidence, unexpectedness, is the event unexpected or not? Alternative explanations, can you rule out alternative explanations? Most commonly disease progression, which can explain the event. Temporal occurrence, is the event being reported in greater numbers within the first few years of launch, and then subsequently the numbers decline as the interest in the product also declines. Then you need to look at the disproportionality score. A higher disproportionality score goes in favor of a causal association. And does the disproportionality score increase further with time? This again is a strong factor in favor of causality. And multiple signaling countries, is the event being reported from multiple countries where the product is marketed. So unless the event is genetically primed and therefore likely to affect only particular ethnic groups, an event which is being reported from a large number of regions, large number of countries, is more likely to be a true association rather than a chance of causal association. So till date, we have no successful machine algorithm, no successful AI algorithm to deduce causality, and you still need human interpretation to evaluate signals for possible causality. So what is the end result? What is the outcome of all these activities? The outcome you can summarize in 3 words: confirmed, unconfirmed, and therefore requiring further evaluation, and refuted. So what's a confirmed signal? It has been assessed for causality, frequency, clinical implications, preventability, and all the assessments are pointing to a clinically important event which cannot be dismissed by as mere chance association or cannot be explained away by other factors. So confirmed signals will lead to regulatory actions. At the very least, it will lead to labeling changes. So you update the prescribing information, and at times you need to update the safety information, the core safety information printed on drug labels and packaging. It may also need special warnings, and in the worst case scenarios, like with rofecoxib product recall. Unconfirmed signals. So despite the best efforts of machine and mind, the signal cannot be confirmed. That is, causality cannot be confirmed. So the result is we have to continue to monitor the event and reprioritize based on new information. So your work is not over. You still have work to do with this signal. And refuted. So the signal has been refuted. Most commonly, disease progression is a common reason why signals are refuted, and they are not attributed to the drugs being used in the disease. So in that case, the particular activity around that signal will be brought to a close. So confirmed, unconfirmed, and refuted, and whatever decisions are taken would have to be communicated. So in case of WHO, it communicates it to the regulatory agencies of the countries participating in that global monitoring program. So to conclude, signal detection and processing are essential pharmacovigilance activities. So if you think pharmacovigilance is the sum total of activities dedicated to detection, monitoring, and prevention of adverse drug reaction, then you need to detect signals, prioritize signals, evaluate signals, and therefore the signals turn out to be signals that get confirmed. You need to act upon them in order to minimize risk and improve patient safety. So this is only possible on a background of organized suspected ADR reporting. It's not a one-man effort, or nowadays, as we are increasingly seeing, not a one-country effort. It's an effort of entire mankind, a global effort. It requires investment of time, expertise, and resources. While statistical quantification is important in mining large databases, in risk screening, human evaluation is still indispensable to signal evaluation. And mind you, this is a very intense area of activity, and there are many people who are doing their PhDs on this aspect of pharmacovigilance, signal detection, signal prioritization, signal evaluation, and so on. Prioritization strategies are required to make human evaluation feasible. Lots of strategies are existing, but we cannot say that all are the foolproof. We don't need better strategies. We do need better strategies. So outcome of signal evaluation guides further pharmacovigilance activity. So I'll stop here. So thank you for listening to me patiently. And I can see that 50 participants are online on this Zoom platform. And maybe if we are live streaming it, then on the Facebook platform, there might be other listeners. If we have a little bit time, Dr. Shambhu.
Yes, sir.
I'll stop screen sharing, and if any participants wants to clarify anything, I'll be happy to address those issues.
Yes, sir. First of all, thank you, sir. Thank you for giving this very difficult topic in such a simplistic way. And we are really grateful to you, sir, for giving us time on this very important topic. So there are some questions in the chat box. So first of all, may I request Professor Shantanu Kumar Tripathi, sir, and Professor Nihar Vishwas, sir, if you have any comment or any important notes on this, please unmute yourself and give your valuable comments.
Yes, yes, Dr. Biswas first. If you have any comments, Dr. Biswas.
Sir, you have to unmute yourself, sir.
Dr. Hazra, for your presentation, and I expect more from you in future deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I can see some queries in the chat box. And one of
Yes.
these is very interesting, that if A, B, C, D, any of them comes to a value of 0, then how do we calculate the reporting odds ratio? Now that's an unfair question, I would say. That any of you who calculates odds ratio knows that if there is 0 in any of the cells, then it becomes very difficult. You can apply some correction factors, but fortunately, when we are looking at large databases, databases which running into thousands and hundreds and thousands and millions of individual case safety reports, that it is very likely that A, B, or C, D will come out to be 0. If it comes out to be 0, we cannot do the calculation at that stage. We'll have to wait for that 0 value to be upgraded, and then we do it. It's as simple as that. Okay. Can you please throw some light on triage strategies in the WHO ADR reporting system, or more importantly, WHO signal detection systems? Now, what we spoke about is the WHO signal detection system itself. So WHO itself does not directly involve in the pharmacovigilance activity. So that responsibility has been given to largely to the Uppsala Monitoring Center and to certain other agencies. WHO brings out this publications, this WHO pharmaceutical newsletters, the WHO bulletin, where they give reports of areas, and it has also a publication signal, which is actually published from OMC, and that is a privileged communication, because these are events which are not confirmed. If it goes into the public domain, there can be unnecessary hue and cry over it. So that signal publication is distributed to national pharmacovigilance centers to keep them alert. And I'm not aware of a formal triage strategy, so I wouldn't like to speak on that at the moment, but WHO collates information from different sources, like the spontaneous ADR reporting source is one. Then there are some consumer databases. Then you have this company databases, the periodic safety update report. So all these reports are collated, triaged in the global databases. The Vigibase itself is only the spontaneous reporting database, but there are some other databases where information is collated from different sources. I wouldn't like to use the word triage because I'm not familiar with that. So people are trying in various ways to strengthen the collection of individual case safety reports, mining and prioritization activity. I don't see any other questions there. Chat box. What is most frequently reported indices? As we see ROR in the recently published PPI and API CKD in Nature. Dr. Chiranjeev, now, it's not right to say what is most frequently. Both are being used. Traditionally, both reporting odds ratios and proportional reporting ratios have been used, but increasingly for reasons for people are trying to shift to Bayesian statistical methods, which takes care of some of the pre-test and post-test probability concepts. So the Bayesian methods, such as that information component, omega, etc., people are increasingly used, but these are more difficult to understand and more difficult to implement. Therefore, this traditional ROR and PRR are still frequently are still used. They are by no means obsolete. Dr. Bhaskar Krishna has asked, can we use omega statistic where one drug does not cause ADR by itself, but increases risk of ADR due to other drugs? Examples, enzyme inhibitors increasing risk of QTc prolongation due to other drugs. There is no reason why omega cannot be used. Here we are speaking about interaction. So the combined effect of A and A plus B being more than that of Mayer summation. So this is also drug interaction where a drug by itself may not be active, but it may increase the adverse effects of another. Can IC be expressed in frequentist method by O over E? Is that observed by expected indices as mentioned in some literature? Now, I'm not familiar with what is O by E indices, therefore I wouldn't like to comment on this. Now, if ROR is not a very robust method, why it is used, and FDA also reports with this. Again, this is a philosophical explanation. We start with something, then we try to overcome its weaknesses. So traditional statistics has its strengths and has its weaknesses. The strength is its relative simplicity, its implementability in various platforms, but there are shortcomings also. So, which is the reason why ROR, different alternatives to ROR is evolving based upon Bayesian statistics. But again, that information component also has its weaknesses. So therefore, both find a place. You see, whatever method we use, when the associations are strong, when we get large values of disproportionality scores, whether by ROR, PRR, or by IC, omega, that's not a problem. It is only when we have these borderline associations, when the values are a little bit more than 1, maybe the lower bound of the 95% confidence intervals are also above 1, but not by a large amount. There we have a problem. There, although the statistical methodology is suggesting signals, on subsequent review, it may be seen that these are not, these are red flags, but these do not turn out to be actual associations that merit pharmacovigilance action and clinical reporting.
So there is another question asked by Dr. Bhaskar, that will statistics of calculating ROR or PRR be affected by varied reporting rates in different countries?
Varied reporting rates? No. If we integrate, during calculation, if you integrate, I mean, if you collate the reports from different sources, so less reporting from one region would be compensated by relatively larger number of reports from other regions. So these statistics are meant to be applied to large databases. So reporting rates may vary. In fact, they are expected to vary. Some programs are more active, they contribute more. Some program countries are less active in reporting. But when you pull the reports from different sources, you have a large body of reports. And the statistics which are generated, the information that is generated, is based upon this pool report. So it is expected that the same experience or the same associations would hold for different regions. It won't be region-specific associations. However, again, as I said, I put in a point that for genetic or reasons, there may be reports which may be meaningful for certain ethnic groups, but does not meaningful for other regions in the same country or for other countries. So again, that would require filtering and screening by human experts.
Okay. Thank you.
May I make a point here?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. This is regarding, as we understand, the most great effort is taken by WHO, and it's since long, I think more than almost 3 decades, WHO has been in this the pharmacovigilance activity. Although earlier it was not called pharmacovigilance, it was adverse drug reaction monitoring, and their methodology, etc., has also over the time has also improved and improvised. The issue is, as I understand, apart from WHO, although they maintain the largest database globally, but then individual countries regulators, they also have their own database. Their regulatory authority, they also keep on doing the signal processing and taking regulatory decisions on their part. Thirdly, it is also possible that the individual industry.
If I may just point out here that in India, the regulatory agency does its own signal processing, but it is largely qualitative rather than quantitative.
Yes.
What we
Yes.
are doing at the moment.
But then so far as the European Union or the US FDA, they do their own signal processing and signal management separately, and based on which they also take their regulatory. That doesn't mean that for any regulatory action or regulatory decision, they cannot use data or the data inputs from WHO. So that is also there. But then it remains the fact that all countries' regulatory authorities, departments, they also continuously doing this, the safety evaluation of the medications that are marketed, that are licensed. On the other hand, the industry and the marketing authorization holders, apart from the regulatory mandate, they also on their own keep on doing the safety evaluation, and they have their own platform. All the big pharmaceutical industry, they have their pharmacovigilance division. And the question is, and you have also mentioned about the sources of the safety information inputs. While the spontaneous reporting of the PSURs remain one of the important sources, there is also, at least industry tries to also tap from the published literature the probability of repetition and how that is taken care of. Say, for instance, one particular event or the drug event pair, which has been reported in the literature, and the same has also been being otherwise reported to the regulator or in the spontaneous reporting system of the different countries. So how and to what extent it is possible to consider their, when they are quantitated or when they are actually being used, these data are being used for calculation of the different ratios, ROR or PRR, etc. So how that is actually addressed, the possibility of repetition or the possibility of dual reporting. Okay, so is there any mechanism? Is there any one can say that yes, in the manual processing or the manual stages that you have shown, that in the initial manual assessment or the final assessment, there one can try to do that. But is there any specific measures that is adopted, that is taken? Any idea?
Here I can say that this data mining programs which are there, one of the strategies they use, they try to triage information at different fields in order to screen out duplicate reports.
Right.
Because if you keep on adding duplicate reports, this will spuriously increase the value of disproportionality statistics and may lead to generation of spurious signals. So that, I think, is an inbuilt component of these data mining algorithms, that they first try to screen for and eliminate duplicate reports. But exactly how these algorithms work, I can't comment on that. I'm not aware of that. But as far as my knowledge goes, that this is a part of these data mining algorithms.
And the other concern is whether there is a possibility of on a particular drug and event association, that when the same thing is being assessed as per the PSUR data by the regulator, on the other hand, the marketing authorization holder is also doing at his own end, whether there could be a possibility of conflict between these two activities or the outcome of the analysis of by these two different competing agencies, that is the industry and the regulator. Is it possible?
As far as I'm aware, that most of these marketing authorization holders, they generate their periodic safety update reports and they submit to the regulators. It's probably only the largest research-based pharmaceutical companies which do their data mining and signal generation themselves. But apart from it, most of the manufacturers, at least in India, they complete their responsibility by submitting the PSCR reports. So
That is mandated for the first, say, 4 years.
4 years, yes.
But beyond that, it's not mandated, at least so far as the regulations are concerned.
It's not mandated, but these companies, particularly the multinational companies, they continue their program of collecting reports from physicians who are using their products,
Right.
and submitting it to the regulators. But one company I know, AstraZeneca, that does their own marketing, but how far they generate signals and how far they share with the scientific community, that I cannot say. It's probably an internal matter. They are more focused on their own products, own brands.
And they also use this information in their promotion and in their communication to the physician. So
Yes.
But then, so far as their source is concerned, it's not just prescribers. They also have their from the consumer also. Major part of their source is actually from the consumers. They give the toll-free number. Most of the products you will find that there are
numbers, online platforms, particularly in the Western countries, they get a large fraction of the reports from consumers.
Consumers, yeah.
Consumers and consumer organizations.
Right. So, if there are any further comments, any other entry in the chat box? If not, I think it was a wonderful session and very, very useful for not just the postgraduate residents, but then for all of us, each one of us. It is a difficult area, but then it's good to listen to this. I think we need actually to listen to this a few times, then only we can absorb most part of it. But it has been very simplified by Professor Hazra, and we love to listen to him again and again. So thank you very much, Professor Hazra. And now, Dr. Shambo, you can have the concluding comments, and we can call it a day.
Again, sir, thank you very much, sir, for giving us time. And with your permission, we had already recorded this total event. So if anyone requires that recorded version, so we'll share that recorded version to them, and we can repeatedly hear you in that recorded version so that we can understand the subject in a better way. First, and again, once again, really thankful to you. Now, tomorrow we have another session that is a panel discussion, and we have a panel of Dr. Niloy Das, who is a dermatologist, Dr. Shoibal Moitro, Dr. Aratrika Das, who are pulmonologist and allergologist, and myself in the panel. And we have chairperson, Professor Shantanu Kumar Tripathi, sir, and the whole panel discussion will be moderated by Satobisha Mukherjee. So tomorrow's topic is on management of drug allergy. So I, on behalf of Inovocare E-Academy, I invite you all to stay with us tomorrow also from 8:30 p.m. So with that, again, I just want to thank Professor Abhijit Hazra, sir, Professor Shantanu Kumar Tripathi, sir, and Professor Nihar Vishwas, sir, and all the other delegates who were present today. So good night and see you tomorrow.
So thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.